Ja, hallå allihopa. Idag så vill vi sjunga en liten sång till Jonas Hermansson. 1, 2, 3. Ja må han leva, ja må han leva, ja må han leva ut i 100:e år. Ja visst ska han leva, ja visst ska han leva, ja visst ska han leva ut i 100:e år. Ett fyrfallet leve på 48-årsdagen, Jonas. Hipp hipp, hurra, 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 hurra!
Hi. Yes, I'm fine. And you? We're starting now, so. Okay. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this seminar on how to strengthen Europeans' capacity in defense. My name is Göran von Sydow. I'm the director of SIEPS, the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, and we have the pleasure to organize this panel within the context of the program of the European Commission Security Environment. And since 4 years, more than 4 years, with a war ongoing in Ukraine, it has of course spurred many discussions and also actions as to how to strengthen European defense. But it's also true that the wider geopolitical context also has a strong effect on ours in Europe and how we think about how to organize defense. And of course, the tensions across the Atlantic play a strong role in also this dynamic. With this broad background, I think we will try here among us to put a diagnosis to where we are, but also look at the solutions and the paths forward, how to strengthen European security and defense. I will open this with a relatively broad question to all three of you here. That is how you would assess the current security situation for Europe, how you see the main parameters that are informing us on how to think about security in a European wider context. And I would like to start with you, Samantha, to hear your view.
So it's, from the UK point of view, I don't think there's anything I'm going to say that wouldn't be shared by Sweden, which is a nice place to start. If we look at the current security environment in our immediate neighbourhood, we see a still aggressive Russia. Putin hasn't changed any of his demands since 2021 or further back. The increasingly reckless subthreshold or hybrid activity. We've just had a court case in the UK of 2 young men who were paid by the Russian system to commit arson against property associated with the Prime Minister. That's pretty shameless. So where is their risk calculus is a little bit worrying. And clearly they're escalating inside Ukraine, bombing Kyiv, going for civilian targets, using bigger conventional weapons to achieve that. On the other hand, if you look at what's going on in Ukraine, the reason Russia is having to do that because the front is stable now, and Ukraine is actually taking territory back, which is fantastic. The Russian economy is weak. We could have a whole separate seminar on that. But I didn't only want to look at those, that is critical, and we'll come back to it, but a couple of other things I also wanted to mention. One is, as a result of that war, Europe is, if we're talking about the security environment we're in, Europe is finally spending serious money on defence, which is something we've been asking for, and we collectively committed to in 2014 as NATO allies, and we've been looking for a long time. So that's really good. We can maybe talk about how we make that happen. The other two things which I think are increasingly on the agenda, maybe haven't been talked about so much, one is economic security. And happy to come back to that if you like. And the other, of course, is total defence and civil preparedness, where Sweden is so far ahead, or the Nordics are so far ahead of the rest of Europe. But actually, all of Europe should be talking about that.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Now, Ambassador Carlier, what's your view?
Thank you very much, Göran. So we think that Europe is in the most dangerous and unstable situation since we have witnessed since the Cold War. It's at the same time a combination, of course, of a very high level of military threat that we have to face from Russia very clearly. Then you know that there is this kind of continuum between we are no more in peacetime, we are not, as far as we are concerned, we are not in wartime. Ukraine, that war, but we are already in this competition and crisis ongoing situation where Russia, they use all kind of leverages. So this is all about hybrid warfare, destabilization. We also have, this uncertainty in all domains, so growing competition. We were together in another panel yesterday afternoon where we said that it's all intertwined now, interconnected. Of course, it's about defense and security, but it's all interconnected with geopolitical competition as well. And so security has to be understood from that perspective very broadly. It does encompass defense, but also energy, technological autonomy, economic resilience, and also preparedness and societal cohesion that Samantha was just mentioning. At the same time, we have to, let's say, face this instability in also our southern neighborhood that we do not have to forget. There is still a very high level of terrorism and threat in Sahel, in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean region. And you know that if, let's say, you let a crisis expand, it can also have some impact elsewhere. So it has to be, of course, taken into account. And then we also have to face an uncertainty about what is the future level of the US engagement we are going to have in Europe for the time to come. I do not want to appear as too anxious, but some of you may know that, you know, in France, Marc Bloch, who was a very famous author and also warrior in the French in the First World War, he wrote 1940. He was brought in the Panthéon just a few days ago, and he's very famous about a book that he wrote, which was called A Strange Defeat, which is about we knew that something could happen in the late 30s, and we failed to prepare ourselves. So it's also about, and I think it's a discussion we're going to have within the panel, how we are able to prepare in the years to come, because we know that we could be in a position to face a high-intensity conflict in 3 to 5 years time frame. I was very impressed to listen, you know, to some Ukrainian very courageous soldiers a few days ago who said, you have more time than we had. So it's also about how you use this time to prepare yourself.
Indeed, and it's strong recommendations for anyone to watch the Panthéon ceremony the other day from Marc Bloch. Niklas, you as a researcher, having listened to the ambassadors, what would be your assessment of where we find ourselves today?
Thank you, Göran. Very happy to be here on this panel with these very distinguished, of course, members, and also happy to be here with the two, kind of representing the two military powers, of course, of Europe. So I can't be in a better company, I guess, to answer that question. To me, as a researcher, I always think that there's nothing more practical than a good theory, and I think there's at least kind of three concepts that can help us think a little bit where we are at the moment, also listening to what the ambassadors has just said, right? So when we think about building defense in Europe, it's tightly linked to the challenge and question of organizing defense, right? So the first concept I like to kind of put on the table here is the embedded transactionalism that has always been part of the transatlantic bargain. Now, the French ambassador here mentioned the kind of growing uncertainty of the U.S. commitment to European defense, and that is, of course, something that we're experiencing at this moment. Having said that, it's very hard to see how Europe can build some kind of meaningful military capacity outside of a transatlantic kind of framework. So the kind of the embedded transactionalism, this deal that the Europeans somehow need to lean into and kind of cater to certain US demands is going to be there, I think, also moving forward. And how to do that and how to kind of get the kind of European side in order is I think, one of the big challenges for organizing European defense. Now, the other concept is intense intergovernmentalism. I think that is part of, what we're trying to get at on the European side, how to organize better European cooperation on defense. What we have seen is a lot of let's call it, decision making. Samantha mentioned that there has been, of course, an increased kind of commitment to defense spending and investment, also using EU kind of funds, right? There has been a lot of creativity on the European side in kind of getting resources on the table. However, we are not seeing any, at least in my assessment, meaningful kind of integration when it comes to kind of defense sector and defense industry kind of capability. So, and that is, I think, also shown here on the panel, right? We can't think of European defense in meaningful terms without the UK, of course. Whereas the UK after Brexit is not going to be at the table when we're discussing these matters in the EU. And I don't think we can really think about another framework for actually doing some meaningful organizational European defense outside of the EU in order to kind of, again, lean into the transatlantic bargain. So to me, this is the challenge of organizing and kind of building European defense at the moment. I don't think we're 4 years into the war, and there's a lot of happening, but I think these kind of more structural challenges are still with us. And then there is something else that I think would be interesting to hear also from the other panelists, to reflect on the security dilemma that is obviously always going to be there at the core of how to organize European defense and what to do when we are in another phase in the conflict in Ukraine, right? The interesting thing with Ukraine at the moment is that Ukraine is a security provider, right? There has been dramatic changes on the battlefield over the last couple of months, right? And we're seeing now what the Ukrainians can do vis-a-vis Russia, right? Something that we were not seeing a couple of months ago. But on the other hand, having Ukraine outside of NATO, that's not part of the discussion, or that's out. We're not seeing that. And probably we're not going to see Ukraine in the EU in a long time either, right? So how to think about how to, again, organize European defense when Ukraine is going to play a very important part, but I don't think we're seeing Ukraine as part of either NATO and the EU in the long term moving forward, regardless of what's happening in the battlefields and regardless of what we're seeing maybe even this fall when it comes to the dynamics of this particular conflict. So I'd like to put that on the table. I'm very curious to hear what Samantha and Thierry is thinking about that.
Thank you so much, Niklas, and I think they are eager to comment. So I'm immediately handing over to you, Samantha.
I'm going to say three things on Ukraine. Firstly, when I was here last year, I used to say, well, whichever future comes for Ukraine, if there is peace, if the war is continuing, we need to back the Ukrainian military. And if there's peace, we need to back the Ukrainian military for our own deterrence. This year, I think slightly differently about it. That's still true, but now we need to involve Ukraine. We're learning from Ukraine. They can help us redesign and think about what future warfare might look like with their security providers. They're also technology providers. And so it's the relationship, the subtle ways is changing. We're working with the defense industries in European countries now. We're doing it that way around. And I was really struck by what you said about potential futures. So even in a peace scenario, there are different futures for Ukraine. There's one where we are still there. UK signed a 100-year partnership. Maybe the EU will do similar things. We're still supporting and we're funding the reconstruction together, and we're developing the European future of Ukraine. There's another one that has happened to other countries, sort of accession countries, where over time they get more and more fed up because we've made a bunch of promises, and then for one reason or another, bureaucratic or financial, it doesn't quite live up to what they were hoping for. And the post-war Ukraine is going to be incredibly capable technological and military power. I kind of don't want them in that category, feeling a bit resentful that the EU made all these promises and the Western world made all these promises. I count the UK as part of that. I think we should be thinking about that now. So I'm really glad you raised it.
Definitely. Thank you.
Welcome, Ludger Siemens, Ambassador of Germany to Stockholm. Great to have you here on the panel. And I will let you catch your breath and listen to the others, and then I will give you the floor. But first, Thierry.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to comment on 2 points. So when it comes to Ukraine, so as Samantha mentioned, we already have this very strong link with Ukraine. Perhaps we will come back later about our expectations for the NATO summit, but to me, the very first one, the highest priority, is how we continue to support Ukraine in the long run and how they are able to deter Russia. So I think it's, and of course we very much commend the very high level of Swedish support granted to Ukraine. As Samantha mentioned, we learn a lot from them. So I think that they are, now when it comes to defense industry model, where we need to invent something else, we need to be much quicker than in the past in order to capture the technology, but also to ramp up and reach some mass production capabilities. We already have, very good teamwork between Ukrainian companies and other European companies, let's say, so as to capture this model we have from Ukraine. And when it comes to Ukraine's accession to the EU, I do not fully share your point. I think it has to resume. So of course we know it's a long way, but you have noticed that during the last EU Council, the fundamental clusters they have been opened. We commend, and especially in the current context, how Ukraine, was able, let's say, to do some reforms, and so it's for us, it's the highest priority that Ukraine is going to become an EU member. And of course, we all have to do our homework in order to make it happen. So to me, let's say we already have this leverage on, let's say, how first to continue to support Ukraine in the long run, and then how to already integrate Ukraine in our, let's say, defense ecosystem, and also in the EU1 when it comes to the European defense industrial base. We are going to have a new model, and Ukraine is already fully part of that. Then, when it comes to what you mentioned about defense industry, of course, I share your assessment. We need to accelerate, but I just wanted to mention that we already have some examples of integration. So they are between the UK and France. You may know that, let's say, our missile company, which is called MBDA, it's a fully joint UK-French company. And I think that there is no, let's say, no other item that missile can be more sensitive. So which it's already, I think, a very good degree of integration of what we have to do, what we can do in Europe. Of course, there is more to be done. We need to have more pragmatic way of cooperation, of armament programs, but I'm also very convinced that we need to be able to use the increase of our defense spendings in Europe. And so once again, Sweden is a very good example, reaching 3.5% by 2030 time frame. It would really be a missed opportunity if, we would continue, let's say, to use our national funding, let's say, only for national programs and to stay in stovepipes. So we need to have a more pragmatic and flexible approach to cooperations. We need to do more joint procurements. We do not need to reinvent the wheel each time, but of course we need to make some courageous choices, but we need to use that money in order, let's say, to foster a European defense industrial base, because otherwise it would be a fully missed opportunity. It's not going to happen again that we have all this amount of money at the same time.
Thank you so much, Thierry. And now I think, Luca, great to have you here. Thanks for rushing you through the streets of Visby, and you're safe. And so what we've done so far, we tried to make a little diagnosis of where we find ourselves. And I'm now going to, as the moderator, move us in direction what then would be the prioritized actions in order to achieve.
If I may just react to what has been said. So very short. On defense cooperation, I think there the cooperation is the most intense field of in between Ukraine and members of the European Union, UK and others. So there, I wouldn't say integration, but there is the most intense field of cooperation already happening. Second, EU, the ultimate goal is to have Ukraine as member of the European Union. This is the ultimate goal. Chancellor Merz wrote a letter to the other heads of states and governments just a month ago and with a couple of proposals to make this happen. Everybody knows, and we should not we should be honest to one another, is this is going to be an extremely difficult process. Ukraine is going to be a country which comes out of a war. You have displaced persons, you have veterans, you have people who have migrated to other countries, you have a war-torn economy. This is going to be an extremely difficult process, but the goal is membership. And there's what and to have the ultimate reason in this, if it doesn't happen in the very end, and both sides have to work on it, it's giving Putin, for Putin it's a victory snatching out of the jaws of defeat. So this is why it has to happen. Likewise, NATO. So things the targets are set, but we have to see we have to make it happen. That's the challenge. And on defense matters, we have the money. The problem is speed, and the problem is a learning curve. Cooperation is going underway. Germany is sometimes, to some critical voices in other European countries, is wanting to build up the strongest army and continental army in Europe. We are spending more on non-nuclear defense matters than the UK and France combined, just to set the proportion in this. So things are happening. Procurement rules are changed to make it way more quick, to make things more quickly done. So things are really happening, and we should. We see still the need for speed. This is probably the biggest challenge we are facing, but I want to have a more positive outlook in this.
Thank you. So time flies when you're having fun. So we are now looking at a quite ambitious agenda. You've all raised the security notions quite broadly speaking. So we're talking about the military, defense as such. We're also talking about economic security or technology or hybrid, total defense, etc. So I wanted to ask you then, what in all of these big major tasks ahead of us, how should then we prioritize? What are the most important things to focus on in the medium term? What do you say on this?
So first of all, the key political relationships. So if you look at what the UK, France are doing, preparing, leading coalition of the willing into Ukraine, preparing for the Straits of Hormuz, those political relationships are really strong. We've got a really good E3 political dialogue going on at the moment, which we hope can also be useful in appropriate ways. So that's really good, but it takes constant care. For Europe, the defence industrial question is really, really critical for us. Yes, love MBDA, does great missiles, by some. But we've also got some structural things going on inside the European Union for very good economic security reasons. But there's a risk of kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, where we end up cutting supply chains in and out of the UK or perhaps other technology providers, and you end up with less innovation, you end up with less cutting edge tech, and you end up with a weaker defence industry and weaker capabilities and a weaker European defence. So I can't say that enough times. I will try not to say it as the answer to every question you ask me, but it sort of could be. Yeah. It's really very, very important that we get that right. The other thing I would say is turning the spending that we've got into capability, deployable troops, interoperability. I think we've got a NATO construct which tells us sort of where we're going and what we can do and how we can make it stronger, rather than trying to reinvent wheels and kind of go, what should we spend this on? We know, we have plans, but making sure that this huge increase is going to things that will make a concrete difference is really good. And then there are some other economic security issues around cybersecurity, around energy security, even around personnel security. In a hybrid world, our people are our biggest resource, but they're kind of our biggest risk too. And I wonder whether things like security checks for our staff, normal in government, may start coming back into fashion.
Thierry, what do you see as the most priorities areas to work on?
I try to be quite simple. I think that first we have to continue to increase our defense spending. This is what we do. As we mentioned, it's quite a unique opportunity, so this has to be, of course, our first priority. Then we have to, let's say, to use these funds, let's say, in order to strengthen our European defense industrial base. So as we said, of course, we have to, of course, there have to be found new ways of cooperation, but we have to avoid duplications. We have to promote synergies. And as Samantha was mentioning, this is also going to, you know, to further strengthen interoperability and interchangeability between our equipment. So we already have, I think, within Europe, a very performance defense industrial base. You may know that in France, it's more than, let's say, 4,500 companies which are part of that. Of course, alongside with the big prime contractors, and they all are involved, let's say, in cutting-edge technologies. Then, third, I think we still have to further improve our military readiness. So it means that our forces, they need to be more deployable, they need to be better trained and drilled, and they must be capable of operating together by having this stronger degree of interoperability. And then when it comes to the EU framework and the EU readiness and strategy, so we know that there is, let's say, still capabilities where we rely on the US, where, let's say, with interest of the US, that they can rely on a stronger and a more autonomous Europe. So it's how we embody that pillar within NATO. Then we have to continue to invest in new technologies, because they are also going to be game changer, both for our defense, but also more broadly for our security and resilience. So of course it's about AI, it's about cyber, it's about space, it's about quantum. So it's also about how we take all the return on experience of this and how we are going to use these new technologies in future conflict. I think, yeah.
Ambassador Siemens, what do you see then? Already outlined a few things, but from the German perspective, given this quite big change that German policies are undergoing, but how then should one prioritize in this?
We have to continue to slash bureaucracy. We have to continue to go more into a trial and error mode and accept failure. The German defense minister just cancelled a frigate program yesterday. It was a typical German...
What should be done in the EU? What's the role of NATO? What are the coalitions of willing, etc.? From your perspective and what you've already raised as dilemmas or tensions, how would you see... where do we find ourselves today, and what would you see for the future in terms of how this will look, what it will look like?
Thank you, Göran. I really like the kind of what Samantha brought up, in the sense that we need to start imagining kind of possible futures, right? The whole idea of kind of future imaginaries, I think, is extremely important in the state we are at the moment. And listening to the ambassador, I think on the one hand, we are in very much familiar territory, right? We could have had this discussion already in the 90s, in a sense, of how to organize the European pillar, if you want to call it that, in NATO, and what to do with the transatlantic bargain, where US priorities and interests seem to be shifting, right? And that obviously is something that where we are at the moment and as well. So in a sense, the kind of the two-level dip, and this is, I think, you're again very right in the sense that it's about kind of curating, maintaining this political relations, right, relationships, and it's a kind of that two-level game. On the one hand, how to get the European side to somehow get a more of a unified vision of what it is to have strategic autonomy, in what sectors and at what cost, right? And how to kind of try to regain some of that transatlantic partnership moving forward. I mean, I think we're all sensing there is a lot happening also on the US side, and of course, I guess the Trump administration is in a different political situation today than it was only a couple of months ago, right? And we have midterms coming up. So again, be maybe a little bold to think about, you know, what is going to be that bargain with the US moving forward, because we are seeing a lot of movement when it comes to European defense, building European defense capacities, but maybe not in some of the very key defense capacities, right? Terry, you mentioned long-range missile, right? Or kind of the long-range strike capabilities. We have not touched nuclear, right? That has not been up for discussion here. And of course, we're also moving into this space where we're talking about tech sovereignty or how to somehow carve a space for Europe that is possibly going to be less dependent on the US, where the US, of course, has such a huge kind of advantage at the moment. So I think that is really where I'd like to see more kind of political kind of creativity and thinking moving forward. Kind of playing this two-level game on the European side vis-a-vis the US, and also, of course, what that will mean in terms of projecting power and capability from Europe outside. And of course, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, is what everyone's thinking about at the moment.
Samantha, now the other day it was 10 years since Brexit, and of course this has had significant effects in many terms, but here we're talking also about a development that is ongoing, where I think all states in Europe, they are looking for different kind of security arrangement, and as we talked about, there are these various formats, but part of it is also happening inside the EU, of course. So from the UK perspective, looking at the issues that Niklas brought up, what would be your sort of way to consider this? How should one then think about what the best formats, but also what should be done in what kind of constellation and organization?
So I think it's probably worth just putting on the record the UK is getting closer to the EU. The first deal we did with the EU, as the UK and the EU, however weird that sounds, was in security and defence. And we're preparing for another summit coming up fairly shortly. And again, security and defence is very much on there. So there is a reconnecting happening. I promised I wouldn't bring up industry at every question, but I'm kind of going to, because 4 out of the 5 biggest defence industries in Sweden have links to the UK. So as we think about dealing with the other big geopolitical threats, the reason we're not raising it as the UK is because it's such a given. You're sitting under the UK as the UK is because it's such a given. You're sitting under the UK nuclear umbrella right now, everybody. You have been since you joined the alliance, and it's been there since 1962. And we are with a national programme to make sure it continues and is resilient and is there for everyone.
So this summer we will see, just in a few weeks' time, there is a NATO summit, which will be important, of course, in Ankara, and also at the same time, on the EU side, they are working on a new security strategy that is due to come out in maybe September or something. So from your perspective, what would be your expectations for what we will see, of course, or expect to be see in the Ankara meeting, but also how do you think the EU will orient itself and perhaps find some new tools or ideas for the future? Thierry.
Thank you. So, when it comes to Ankara, I think the key word has to be unity. So we need to showcase NATO unity. Absolute and first and foremost priority has to, to continue and to further develop support to Ukraine in the long run. Because Ukraine is now in a better shape on the front, but there is of course still a very long way to go. So it proves to be successful, but we definitely have to further increase the efforts. Then I think we must, it's all about this NATO 3.0 debate, but we have no problem, let's say, that the US, they want that Europe takes a stronger collective posture when it comes to collective defense. And so we are going to also to showcase our stronger commitments on defense spending. And then it's also all about how we are vis-à-vis Russia, be able to deter Russia in the long run. So how also we reinforce our deterrence on the NATO eastern flank. So I think this has to be the main outcomes of the NATO summit for us. Then also how we improve our military readiness. And then, you know, when it comes about the EU security strategy and defense, to me, we know already what we have to do. In fact, we just have to write it down. But I think it's what we tackle upon here. To me, the real and the final aim is how, with this EU security strategy, how we are going to fully embody this European pillar within NATO. So we know the capabilities we need. We mentioned deep precision strike. We mentioned integrated air and missile defense. We mentioned intelligence. We mentioned strategic airlift. So we already know the big capabilities where it's going to be useful, let's say, to find an European scheme in order to make them happen. And then what we also need, because we also need it for NATO, is, let's say, how we foster this European defense industrial base. So to me, we just needed some way to be courageous enough in order to write it down. You know that perhaps there is also quite an important topic, is that when it comes to defense in the European framework, we need the European financing tools, but at the end of the day, it's the member states which needs to stay, let's say, the owners of how we express the military needs.
Yeah, true that. Ludger, what's your view for the near future on these two organizations and what will happen?
NATO summit. Unity, supporting Ukraine, confronting Russia, and every participant in good mood. With regard to the European security strategy, we need a 360-degree approach, so taking in all aspects, whereas we have seen are a challenge to European security, from the including Arctic, including many new challenges which are on the table. And also, and this is important, and it doesn't only apply to the United Kingdom, but it includes all those states which are important for European security, starting also with Canada, including Canada, Norway, UK, and others, and to bring them into the fold in the European thinking and having them participate in contributing to their own security and to European security. I think these are the most two crucial aspects for the European security strategy.
Niklas.
Thank you. No, I don't think I can add that much to what has already been said, but it is going to be interesting to, of course, to watch the dynamics around that summit, right? I think a lot of what we have been discussing here on this panel has kind of revealed features of organizing European defense and kind of building European defense that has been there for a very long time, right? It has kind of surfaced, and of course that if we're going to live now in a world where the kind of the bargain is going to be much more clouded in kind of naked power talk from the US, that is going to be a very different kind of partnership to navigate and maintain. So of course, in that sense, it is going to be very interesting to see what kind of language the allies are going to be able to agree on at that summit, right? And to what extent there is going to be this kind of diplomatic legwork in order to kind of maybe get that partnership a little bit more functional again, because it is the structural features are there, the dependencies are there, and the dilemmas that we started off are still not, of course, resolved. So it's going to be here, and it's going to be to our diplomatic friends and diplomatic services the job to stitch this together as we move forward.
We have only about 1 minute left in this panel, so if we meet next year and we have more time to discuss this, do you think that we will be in a safer place in Europe? And if so, why? What would be the most important thing that can happen in the course of this year to make Europe a safer place? Samantha, do you have the answer?
Positive outcome in Ukraine, partnership with Ukraine for the future. That would be the single greatest thing, preferably without a complete meltdown in internally in Moscow, because that would raise a whole different set of threats.
Yeah, true that. Thierry?
Same about Ukraine, absolutely. So absolute priority, and we see that they are already in a better shape So it's quite positive from that perspective. And then I also hope that in a year from now, perhaps not all of it, but that we will have done some progress when it comes to this, let's say, European integration and how we have this, let's say, stronger EU
In Russia.
This is what happens when you ask a seasoned diplomat for one thing and a positive thing. You get a full list of the
challenges.
of the challenges.
We want to keep our job.
It goes for researchers too, Niklas.
Of course, also we're also here for attract more.
Do you see
more
something?
No, but okay. So just to add, then I think we're all in agreement. But coming back to the issue of kind of future imaginaries, if there's something that we could maybe want to have more of a discussion is okay. So what will be the kind of Helsinki Final Act 2.0, or what is going to be that kind of response or expression of that moving forward? Because I think we're all wanting to have, of course, Ukraine very close to the EU, if not full membership, with a very kind of tight partnership, so to avoid that sense of resentment, right? And also, of course, that the war is ended, Russia is kind of backing off, of course. But the question remains, right, that Russia is situated where it is, and there is going to be some kind of,
how to make a European security
because
order.
that's part of organizing and building European defense as well.
So let's see in a year from now, maybe we're there. In the meantime, I'd like to thank the three ambassadors for excellent contributions to this discussion, and of course to Niklas for your valuable contributions too, and to all of you who have been here listening. And please join me in thanking the panel, and enjoy the rest of the day here in Almedalen.
Thank you. Thank you.